Late that afternoon, I caught 2 more bees. Lying on my stomach across the bed, I watched how they orbited the space in the jar, around and around like they'd missed the exit. Rosalind poked her head in the door. You all right? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm leaving now. You tell your daddy I'm going out to town tomorrow instead of coming here. You're going to town? Take me, I said. Why do you want to go? Please, Rosalind. I'm going to have to walk the whole way. I don't care. Ain't nothing much going to be open but firecracker stands in the grocery store. I don't care. I just want to get out of the house some on my birthday. Rosalind stared at me, sagging low on her big ankles. All right, but you ask your daddy. I'll be there first thing in the morning. She was out the door. I called after her. How come you're going to town? She stayed with her back to me a moment, unmoving. When she turned, her face looked soft and changed, like a different Rosalind. Her hand dipped into her pocket where her fingers crawled around for something. She drew out a folded piece of notebook paper and came to sit beside me on the bed. I rubbed my knees while she smoothed out the paper across her lap. Her name, Rosalind Daisy, was written 25 times, at least down the page in large, careful cursive, like the first paper you turned in when school starts. This is my practice sheet, she said. For the 4th of July, they're holding a voters' rally at the Colored Church. I'm registering myself to vote. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. Last night, the television had said a man in Mississippi was killed for registering to vote, and I myself had overheard Mr. Bussey, one of the deacons, say to T-Ray, "Don't you worry, they're going to make them write their names in perfect cursive and refuse them a card if they forget so much as to dot an I or make a loop on their Y." I studied the curves of Rosalind's R's. Does T-Ray know what you're doing? T-Ray, she said. T-Ray don't know nothing. At sunset, he shuffled up, sweaty from work. I met him at the kitchen door, my arms folded across the front of my blouse. I thought I'd walk to town with Rosalind tomorrow. I need to buy some sanitary supplies. He accepted this without comment. T-Ray hated female puberty worse than anything. That night, I looked at the jar of bees on my dresser. The poor creatures perched on the bottom, barely moving, obviously pining away for flight. I remembered then the way they'd slipped from the cracks in my walls and flown for the sheer joy of it. I thought about the way my mother had built trails of graham cracker crumbs and marshmallows to lure roaches from the house rather than step on them. I doubted she would have approved of keeping bees in a jar. I unscrewed the lid and set it aside. You can go, I said. But the bees remained there, like planes on the runway, not knowing they'd been cleared for takeoff. They crawled on their stalk legs around the curved perimeters of the glass, as if the world had shrunk to that jar. I tapped the glass, even laid the lid on its side, but those crazy bees stayed put. The bees were still there the next morning when Rosalind showed up. She was bearing an angel food cake with 14 candles. Here you go, happy birthday, she said. We sat down and ate 2 slices each with the glasses of milk. The milk left a moon crescent on the darkness of her upper lip, which she didn't bother to wipe away. Later I would remember how she set out, a marked woman from the beginning. Sylvan was miles away. We walked along the ledge of the highway, Rosalind moving at the pace of a bank vault door, her spit jug fastened on her finger. Haze hung under the trees, and every inch of air smelled overripe with peaches. You limpin'? Rosalind said. My knees were aching to the point where I was struggling to keep up with her. A little. Well, why don't we sit down on the side of the road a while, she said. That's okay, I told her. I'll be fine. A car swept by, slinging scalding air and a layer of dust. Rosalind was slick with heat. She mopped her face and breathed hard. We were coming to Ebenezer Baptist Church, where T-Ray and I attended. The steeple jutted through a cluster of shade trees. Below, the red bricks looked shadowy and cool. Come on, I said, turning in the drive. Where are you going? We can rest in the church. The air inside was dim and still, slanted with light from the side windows, not those pretty stained glass windows, but milky panes you can't really see through. I led us down front and sat in the second pew, leaving room for Rosalind. She plucked a paper fan from the hymn book holder and studied the picture on it, a white church with a smiling white lady coming out of the door. Rosalind Fan and I listened to little jets of air coming off her hands. She never went to church herself, but on those few times T-Ray had let me walk to her house back in the woods, I'd seen her special shelf with a stub of candle, creek rocks, and a reddish feather, and a piece of John the Conqueror root, and right in the center a picture of a woman propped up without a frame. The first time I saw it, I asked Rosalind, "Is that you?" Since I swear the woman looked exactly like her, with woolly braids, blue-black skin, narrow eyes, and most of her concentrated in her lower portion like an eggplant. "This is my mama," she said. The finish was rubbed off the sides of the picture where her thumbs had held it. Her shelf had to do with a religion she'd made up for herself, a mixture of nature and ancestor worship. She stopped going to the House of Prayerful Gospel Holiness Church years ago because it started at 10 in the morning and didn't end till 3 in the afternoon, which is enough religion to kill a full-grown person, she'd said. T-Ray said Rosalind's religion was plain wacko, and for me to stay out of it. But it drew me to her to think she loved water rocks and woodpecker feathers, that she had a single picture of her mother just like I did. One of the church doors opened and Brother Gerald, our minister, stepped into the sanctuary. "Well, for goodness sake, Lily, what are you doing here?" Then he saw Rosalind and started to rub the bald space on his head with such agitation I thought he might rub down to the skull bone. We were walking to town and stopped in to cool off. His mouth formed the word "oh," but he didn't actually say it. He was too busy looking at Rosalind in the church, Rosalind who chose this moment to spit in her snuff jug. It's funny how you forget the rules. She was not supposed to be inside here. Every time a rumor got going about a group of Negroes coming to worship with us on Sunday morning, the deacon stood locked arms across the church steps to turn them away. "We love them in the Lord," Brother Gerald said, "but they have their own places." "Today is my birthday," I said, hoping to send his thoughts in a new direction. "It is? Well, happy birthday, Lily." How old are you now?" 14. "Ask him if we can have a couple of these fans for your birthday present," said Rosalind. He made a thin sound intended for a laugh. "Now, if we let everybody borrow a fan that wanted one, the church wouldn't have a fan left." "She was just kidding," I said, and stood up. He smiled, satisfied, and walked beside me all the way to the door where Rosalind tagged behind. Outside, the sky had whited over the clouds, and shine spilled across the surfaces, sending motes before my eyes. When we cut through the parsonage yard and were back on the highway, Rosalind produced 2 church fans from the bosom of her dress, and doing an impersonation of me gazing up sweet-faced, she said, "Oh, Brother Gerald, she was just kidding." We came into Sylvan on the worst side of town. Our houses set up on cinder blocks. Fans wedged in the windows, dirt yards, women in pink curlers, colorless dogs. After a few blocks, we approached the Esso station on the corner of West Market and Park Street, generally recognized as a catch-all place for men with too much time on their hands. I noticed that not a single car was getting gas. 3 men sat in dinette chairs inside the garage with a piece of plywood balanced on their knees. They were playing cards. "Hit me," one of them said. The dealer, who wore a seed and feed cap, slapped a card down in front of him. He looked up and saw us, Rosalind fanning and shuffling, swaying side to side. "Well, look what we've got here," he called out. "Where are you going?" Firecrackers made a splattering sound in the distance. "Keep walking," I said. "Don't pay any attention." But Rosalind, who had less sense than I dreamed, said in this tone like she was explaining something real hard to a kindergarten student, "I'm going to register my name so I can vote. That's what." "We should hurry on," I said, but she kept walking at her own pace. The man next to the dealer, with hair combed straight back, put down his cards and said, "Did you hear that? We got ourselves a model citizen." I heard a slow song of wind drift ever so slightly in the street behind us and move along the gutter. We walked and the men pushed back their makeshift table and came right down to the curb to wait for us, where they were spectators at a parade and we were the prize float. "Did you ever see one that black?" said the dealer. And the man with his combed back hair said, "No, and I ain't seen one that big either." Naturally, the third man felt obliged to say something, so he looked at Rosalind sashaying along unperturbed, holding her white lady fan, and he said, "Where'd you get that fan?" "Stole it from a church," she said, just like that. I had gone once in a raft down the Chattanooga River with my church group, and the same feeling came over me now, being lifted by currents by a swirl of events I couldn't reverse. Coming along the men, Rosalind lifted her snuff jug, which was filled with black spit, and calmly poured it across the tops of the men's shoes, moving her hand in little loops like she was writing her name, Rosalind Daisy, just the way she'd practiced. For a second they stared down at the juice dribbling like car oil across their shoes. They blinked, trying to make it register. When they looked up, I watched their faces go from surprise to anger, then outright fury. They lunged at her and everything started to spin. There was Rosalind, grabbed and thrashing side to side, swinging the men like pocketbooks on her arms, and the men yelling at her to apologize and clean their shoes. "Clean it off!" That's all I could hear over and over, and the cry of birds overhead, sharp as needles, sweeping from low bow trees, stirring up the scent of pine, and even then I knew I would recoil all my life from the smell of it. "Call the police," yelled the dealer to the man inside. By then, Rosaline lay sprawled on the ground, pinned, twisting her fingers around the clumps of grass. Blood ran from the cut beneath her eye. It curved under her chin the way tears do. When the policeman got there, he said he had to get into the back of his car. "You're under arrest," he told Rosaline. "Assault, theft, and disturbing the peace." Then he said to me, "When we get down to the station, I'll call your daddy and let him deal with you." Rosaline climbed in, sliding over on the seat. I moved after her, sliding as she slid, sitting as she sat. The door closed. So quiet it amounted to nothing but a snap of air, and that was the strangeness of it, how a small sound like that could fall across the whole world.